Welcome to the future of work and solving for experience. My name is Max Chapovsky. I help companies around the country find and negotiate the leases for their office space, ensuring that the space they have is the space they need and reflects and supports their company culture. The Future of Work is a series exploring our evolving relationship with work, the how, where, and why, the trends in tech disrupting and improving the workplace, and perspectives from thought leaders on our new normal. We've established on this show that it's obvious that your people are everything. Without your people, you don't really have very much. And now your people may very well be scattered around the country. Some are going into the office, some are working from home, and everything in between. Now, the employee experience is a concept that, fortunately for the employees, companies are starting to take seriously. A long time ago, I said that office space as a means to an end, the end being productivity, innovation, effectiveness, falls on a sliding scale. On one end of the scale is the avoid at all costs place you literally will do anything to not go to. On the other end is a space that's so well thought out, so accommodating, so flexible that it's not only a joy and a good use of time to go into, it becomes a topic of conversation. For the most part, thankfully, we don't have much of the former anymore, but unfortunately, I still think we need way more of the latter. Now, this doesn't mean, beer on tap and foosball tables, mind you, but it does mean a focus on wellness and abundance of tools and spaces to help people do their best work, whether individual or group work, heads down or collab, and generally the removal of friction across all types of work. So why don't we have more great spaces? Because it's expensive, it takes time, lots of work, and even when it's well thought out and well executed, it's still not really a guarantee that people are going to go in or use it as much as intended, especially in this day and age. So companies have chosen to spend their capital elsewhere. Add that to the prevalence of hybrid work, and you can almost see their point. Almost. You see, the pandemic was an accelerant. It was a forcing function of sorts. People realized that life is too short to work at a place you don't like, to do a job you don't enjoy, to work around people who make your life miserable. And they decided that they want more. And if they don't get it, they're going to move to another company, retire, join the gig economy, or pursue the many other options available to them. And an office, and generally a positive employee experience, demonstrates that companies care enough about their people to invest in their well-being. For those going all remote, they are not off the hook. The employee experience still matters, even if your office is your home or the local coffee shop. The ingredients and levers change, but the impact stands. I've always loved how much thought larger companies have given to the employee experience and how deep they've been able to go on the subject, and today's guests are no exception. So let's jump right in. Evelyn Lee is the first ever global head of workplace strategy and innovation at Slack Technologies, founder of the Practice of Architecture, and co-host of the podcast Practice Disrupted. Lee integrates her business and architecture background with a qualitative and quantitative focus to build better experiences for the organization's employees, clients, and guests. She is widely published, wrote a monthly column for Contract Magazine for over 3 years, and is now a frequent contributor to Architect Magazine. Evelyn has received numerous industry awards, including 2016 40 Under 40 Award for Building Design and Construction and the 2014 AIA National Young Architects Award. She recently served as the first ever female treasurer to the AIA National Board in 2020-2021. Melissa Myers was, until recently, the director of real estate and workplace for Twitter, leading operations in the US, Canada, Mexico, and Brazil. Melissa has over 20 years of experience in the real estate and workplace field, including running all-site operations and employee experience for Intel's Santa Clara campus and Bay Area portfolio. Her early career included hospitality roles at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel and leadership roles in national restaurant chains. She holds a degree in industrial and organizational psychology, which she leverages to understand how workplace shapes the employee experience and how that shapes the future of work. Ladies, welcome.
Thanks for having us, Max.
Hi, Max.
So, Evelyn, let's start with you. How has your role evolved over the last 3 years, would you say?
Yeah, so I have what we call like a workplace strategy background. And a lot of what I did as an outside consultant for companies was to go in, understand how they are working, work with leadership to understand how they would like to work, and then not only through the physical environment, but also through operations, process, and policies, help them bridge that gap. So if you're thinking about pre-pandemic times, it was really, we want to stay in place. We don't want to grow our real estate footprint, but we want to grow the company. So, and we're in these really big private offices right now. So what would it mean to go to an open workspace, to go to desking, to go to hoteling? And how do we do the change management around the cultural shift there? I was really brought into Slack to help them develop a workplace strategy and to help them develop greater rigor in their office builds around programming and planning and understanding how do we meet and how many small, medium, and large size conference rooms do we actually need in our builds, for instance. That dramatically changed when the pandemic hit. And the crazy thing about Slack that most people, I don't think, realize because of our product is we were very much like every other company out there. We had one-to-one assigned desks to our employees. Only about 3 to 5% of our employee population was remote. And we were just hiring around urban cores where we had our offices. So similar to everyone else, we've been figuring out what are the new ways of working? How do we want to work going forward? And we found that our employee population wants a great amount of flexibility within their schedule to kind of choose when they work. So what are new asynchronous workflows that we can adopt to help our project teams be successful, but work in a different way? So now my role really is helping our teams do just that. And a lot of the research that we use to inform what we do at Slack comes from our Future Forum consortium. So it's futureforum.com if you're interested in checking them out.
Yeah, I'll be sure to link to that as well. And Melissa, when you and I were speaking earlier, you talked a little bit about some of the challenges you faced at trying to create this, ideal employee experience. What were some of those challenges that you were dealing with?
Well, like Evelyn, pre-pandemic, everyone was in the office. So getting people to the office, that wasn't our challenge. It was, how do we create a great experience? And I think what we confused then, or I don't know if confused is the right word, but I think we thought people in the office looking busy meant engagement and meant that people were connected to their work and doing the work because you could see them working. And so employee experience then was about the additive things, like what can we do to make the business of life easier maybe. Before I was at Twitter, I was at Intel, and so we had a lot of services because we had a big campus. So a lot of things to make the daily life easier and a lot of fun stuff. And then you get the pandemic, of course, all that goes away, and everybody tries to figure out how to do all that stuff at home with nothing open. And then now you're in a position, Twitter early in the pandemic said employees can be remote, work wherever they want, forever. And then but nobody knew what the future was going to be. Then we opened up all the offices and nobody was, rushing to come back. And so we were trying to create experiences or things that would drive people back in. And what we found is that it didn't necessarily change the number of days you were coming. It would change maybe what day you came. But there's really no cupcake good enough to make you commute in if you're not already going to commute in. But if you really like cupcakes, maybe you come Tuesday instead of Wednesday. But the data showed us that the number attendance through the week didn't change based on what we were trying to do. So then we had to we still did fun stuff, but how do you try to create that meaningful work and that collaboration? And the challenge for us is that in workplace, real estate, we only control a certain portion. We control a lot of that. We can build beautiful spaces. We can have flexible working environments or, kind of varied working environments. You can pick what you want, but nothing changes what the manager, leader of the team does. So if your team is not already coming in and utilizing the beautiful spaces that we create and all of the extra services there, you've still got an individual showing up on Monday and not knowing how they're going to connect with their team if there's not, something around that's an agreed to working style that brings you together on the same day. Because I think that the going into the office daily, it doesn't work for everyone. It works for some people. Some people really love it. And depending on what geo you're in, some people have really small apartments, and working, in a shared environment, living environment doesn't work, or they want to get out of the house and come to work. And those people come to work regularly, but they still may not be having meaningful work with their teams. And I think that was the challenge we were trying to solve for at Twitter.
Yeah. And I think that's actually a great segue into the employee experience. So Melissa, talk a little bit about how you define employee experience and why you think it's important.
I define it differently now than I did before. Pre-pandemic, I would have defined employee experience as all of the fun stuff, but maybe it's the food on site, it's the all the services that you offer, it's the fun parties, it's the afternoon happy hours. I thought all of that was the employee experience because the work was always just the work. Now I think of it as it's the entire work ecosystem. The employee's experience starts from the time they leave their house or start getting ready for work, and whatever that means for them, whether that's get your kid to daycare or get your dog to doggy daycare, or get dressed, commute, drive in traffic, take public transit, whatever it is, that's like starts calculating in your mind what it costs you to get to the office. And so we have to, whether we take action on that or not, we have to think about that in terms of, well, what does that mean for by the time you get to the office? What's that employee's experience already in the day? What's their mindset? And then how do we create an ease of use at the office that allows them to maybe let go of some of that from the morning and be coming ready to work? But if you've already spent a couple of hours just trying to get there, then you get to work and maybe it's not smooth. Maybe the card reader doesn't work, or the technology in the conference room doesn't work, or you reserve that desk but somebody's in it, and all of those things that just compound on that. Now you've got somebody spending their energy trying to sort through that before they've even started work. So it's everything about that. Now they're at work, and how do they do meaningful work, and how do we go beyond maybe what's extras, and we've got great tacos today to it was worth it for me to go in today, and I did meaningful work. I moved that project forward. I could collaborate with Evelyn or whatever it is that I wanted to do. Like when I leave from the day, like that was valuable to me and it was valuable to the company. So that's that whole ecosystem of that.
That's strange.
That view, I was going to say, that view of the employee experience, given your hospitality background, I think rings true for me. Rings true for me, Melissa. I think we've always viewed a little employee experience a little differently. And Max, I didn't mean to cut you off. But
no, go for it.
Yeah, no. So we've, and the wonderful thing about where I was placed within the ecosystem of the employee experience is I'm an architect. I love buildings. I love architecture. I love places. But for us, the employee experience has always been about looking at the entire, this is a very like sustainability vocabulary language, but looking at the entire life cycle of an employee from the very first moment that they are introduced to a company, whether it's online through another employee, through a referral, to their exit interview. So essentially every single person that is supporting the employee, getting them onboarded, their manager helping with professional development, all the way to like what does that look like as they go off and find their new job. So while the work environment is a slice of that, it's also company culture, how relationships are supported, how we build community and managers, both in the workplace, but also on our platform as Slack, and the opportunities for growth and development. So, and I feel like I'm operating in a space that most architects wish they can operate in at times. There was one instance pre-working at Slack where we were brought into a company. It was an older insurance company that created all of this collaborative space. It had these gorgeous new offices, and no one understood why the collaborative spaces weren't being used. And it was pre-pandemic, and it was very much of the mindset, if you're not at your desk, you're not being productive. So we had to literally, the space was underutilized, not because of people not wanting to use it. It was underutilized because they didn't realize they had permission to use it, and it wasn't part of the culture. So much of the work that we did with that organization was purely based on organizational change management, having, managers understand how to manage collaborative teams, like making sure that everybody realized it was okay to have those collaborative moments within the middle of the workday. So a little bit of a different definition, but I can totally see from the hospitality, your hospitality history to how you've derived your definition of employee experience.
I love what you said. In fact, I wrote it down, the life cycle of the employee. And I've done a lot of work in sustainability, so I'm the life cycle of everything, like the furniture, like how long can we use it, and what happens to it when we're done using it. But the life cycle of the employee, I thought was so interesting in terms of their experience, because the life cycle of them at that company, but also their life cycle in their career and what they need and want. And I think people making decisions about employee experience and the workplace strategy and even the design of the physical spaces are typically not brand new in their career. You don't usually get your first job isn't you get to decide the workplace strategy for Slack or for Twitter or for anybody. You got to be in career a little bit. And so if we're not including those people in that decision making and including their perspective, my perspective of what I need is really different than somebody early in their career. Not everybody early in their career has the same need, but that networking or that just being at work and watching somebody else do their job who's been doing it longer, or what are the company cultures, but what employees need and what they understand about how they work best and how they work in that company. I really like your perspective of the whole life cycle.
And the acknowledgement. Yeah, absolutely. And like this acknowledgement that those needs are going to change over time. If you want to keep me from my 20s to my 30s to you're going to have the single college grad that's, probably wants to go out, go out with friends, for drinks afterward, to transition with me through like marriage and motherhood, and then my needs become very dark. I'm checking out early to go pick the kids, up home from school. So yeah, absolutely.
It's such a holistic approach now to the employee from the employer, or at least aspirationally, that's what we'd want to see more of. I think what in my mind has been, the pandemic, it's been a blessing and a curse, right? It's been a curse in so many ways, but it's been a blessing in that it has been a forcing function that made companies take notice of the fact that, people want more, right? As I said in the intro, like they're not going to settle for an organization that doesn't value them for who they are and what stage of life they're in, right, Evelyn? Because it really does change. So what I'm curious about is, Evelyn, what are your sort of top, let's just call it 3 priorities with respect to crafting the ideal or at least optimal employee experience at Slack?
So I think connection and sense of belonging is always what everybody wants, right? If you have connection and sense of belonging, then you have the mechanism you need to not only attract the right individuals, but retain the individuals. And then also the employees of your company are going to be like the best voice boxes to go out and find more people.
Yes.
So that's key to us. And, that happens, I think, in person, but it's funny because I've been working on and off with the Future Forum. Obviously, there's a close link between their research and what we're doing. And I crafted some pieces that were published to their blog with them. And I've been working with one of the co-founders, Helen, for like 2 years throughout the pandemic. And we finally started talking about where we lived. Turns out we are 2 miles apart from one another in the East Bay. And we never realized it, but we still, through that working relationship and talking about having young children, had built a type of connection. So what we've said at Slack is we are digital first, but digital first doesn't mean never in person. So again, back to kind of Melissa's point, when we ask people to take time out of their day to commute into the office, especially those that aren't used to coming into the office on the regular basis, I want them to leave that office, and they can't wait till the next time they're asked to come back in. And that usually means that we're not asking them to come in at a regular cadence, but it's really about bringing the team together to build those impersonal and personable connections that are harder to build through this platform. So I don't know, I guess it's one answer, but it's really about sense of belonging, connecting, but so many different things I feel like trickle down from there.
I mean, if at the end of the day, you have a space that isn't a topic of conversation in a negative way for your employees, and it's helping them do their best work, it really is just a tool, right? That's one of the many tools that an organization has at their disposal to help people do their best work. But it's also an important one. Melissa, you spoke when you and I connected about sensor data and leveraging that to optimize the employee experience. Talk a little bit about that and some of the findings.
We had historically used just badge scan data, how many people came in to work that day. And the sensor data let us know how many people were in the and for how long. Like, what was our peak of attendance? You could say, however many, 500 people, 200 people, whatever the number was for the day. But the sensor data let us know how long were they there. Was that event that we did or that engagement thing on site, did it resonate? If you're like, oh man, 50 people, only 50 people came. And then if you can look at the data, you're like, well, only 75 people were in the building at the time. 50 people coming is pretty good attendance. But it also let us know, like, what areas are used. What's really resonating in terms of a physical space with, okay, now why isn't that area utilized? Right. And then you find, oh, well, that's right next to a mechanical shaft. And even though it's a beautiful room, it's got a little background noise all the time. So people don't use it. Or maybe we don't need 2 micro kitchens on a floor, right? That the flow of traffic tells us that we don't need that. And so we can shift, and maybe we don't need to spend the money or have waste in stocking that. And we can go to one and we can use that space for something else. It's before Twitter at Intel, we use that sensor data in terms of design of space. We had, if you looked at just room bookings, you're like, man, our rooms that are like 10 to 15 people, those are heavily booked. We need more of those. And so we're designing a floor for that. And then sensor data showed us the number of people in the room. There's only
2 people booking
two
out.
or 3.
10-person room. Yep.
Yes, they're booking that because that's what's available to book.
That's the only thing. Yep.
Because at that time, our phone booths were for 1 person. And so when it was just a couple of people talking, they were going into a 3 to 5 person room, which meant the people meeting with 3 to 5 were taking a bigger room.
Yeah.
And so you're like, oh, actually, we need to make our phone booths bigger. Those really need to be 2-person rooms, and then cut our big rooms in half and actually make them, for 6 to 8 or whatever the right number is, but that data, the sensor data really tells us what's resonating with our employees, the flow of traffic. Where do we, where are engagements happening? We used it in Costa Rica to pre-pandemic, obviously, which stations in the cafe actually had the longest lines. So you could pick when you went down. It also told us a lot about which was our most popular food station. So the Sensa data, as that technology has evolved over the last few years, it really gives you really actionable data that can really influence, not just your design, but what programs are you running? What are you offering there? It's been really, really helpful.
I love the data-driven approach, because to me, then your actions are rooted in quantifiable, verifiable, as much as it can be, right? Data, and I think that's fascinating. Evelyn, I'm curious. Obviously, the tool that you have, right? Slack, that is a digital tool that during the pandemic, I'm sure saw absolutely explosive growth, but there are tools and processes and sort of benefits that cannot be digital. So with that in mind, what tools do you try to provide to your employees to help them sort of connect and be effective as much as you can, both in a digital realm and in IRL?
I mean, going back to Melissa's definition of hospitality and experience, I think really when you're showing up in real life, it's about that experience. It's about how do you make it an event, right? There's this whole terminology, the real estate as a service. So as we look at how do we use our office spaces more efficiently and what are our people coming in to do within the office, we're a big company, but tech is in a tight spot right now, right? So they don't have a lot of extraneous capital right now to be redoing entire office suites. So, we're looking at our current portfolio and we're looking at how do we change that experience through an operations lens in terms of how we operate the space, how we reserve space, how do we create an environment for a group that's coming. If an entire team of 50 wants to come in, but they want breakout rooms and then they want to reassemble throughout the day, what does that collection of spaces look like that we need to reserve for that group over the course of 2 to 3 days, rather than just giving a group a neighborhood where they kind of go and do their things and people show up and leave. I'm sorry if I feel like I'm using terminology that your core audience would understand, but like neighborhoods were a thing. Marketing was assigned to a neighborhood, but now it's like, okay, do we take one of those neighborhoods offline and do we assign it for on-sites, right? Like off-sites are now the on-sites are the new off-sites, and how do we make that engagement better? And then for us, that needs to start in Slack, right? Like we'll spin up if you have an onsite, if it's an annual onsite with your bigger group, let's spin up a separate channel to make that really great experience. Gather all the feedback in that channel, get people excited about coming and what the agenda is when they get there. Make sure that all the people traveling in from, especially the new hires that have never been to our offices, understand how to get to our office and, what to do if their badge doesn't work, as Melissa said, and build in that employee experience, starting at home with the invite to that meeting. And then while they're on site, and then again, when they're at home, having them reflect on that experience and asking them how we can improve upon it and really making it better over time. So, but in addition, I want to swing back a little bit, Max, I'm sorry if you want to take control of the conversation again, but I wanted to swing back a little bit to sensor data. There's so much data available that that you have available in your fingertips already that you probably didn't even know you had available to you. So Zoom, for instance, I don't know if you have any Zoom users out there or if you have any Google Calendar users out there. You can look up how often, what is the average meeting size of people, how often they're meeting, how with Google's new in-office versus out-of-office feature, you can see within that meeting, is it truly a hybrid meeting? Is a team showing up on a regular basis? And I don't recommend using any of this data to be monitoring your employees, but I do recommend using the data to create better employee experiences for them. And if you have Zoom Room and Google Meet rooms built into hardware, built into your space, they have the ability to count most of the newer hardware that people installed just before the pandemic happened have the ability to count how many people are actually in the room. So there's like a tremendous amount of data that you could be utilizing to create these data-driven decisions, in addition to the sensor tech that we're constantly looking at too.
I find that both fascinating and challenging. Obviously, it's wonderful that we have all this data available to us, but then the question becomes, how do you effectively implement the conclusions that the data is leading you to when trends change all the time and shift over time as people work from home more or less, et cetera? And more importantly, larger leases are 7, 10, 12, 15 years, right? So if you keep looking at this really granular real-time data, it might tell you that, hey, maybe we can split this large conference room into 2 or 3 smaller rooms. Okay, that's an inexpensive enough modification. But if you have to fund,
I would say no for all the people that always ask me to split conference rooms. But yeah,
right. But then bigger changes are much more expensive to make. So how do you reconcile that?
I think it's. Oh no, go ahead. I feel like I'm talking too much. Go ahead, Melissa.
Oh well, no. I mean, I'd love to hear your perspective from an architect's mindset. But I think that I feel like as an industry, not just all of us trying to sort out the future of work, I think we want an answer. I think we want to be like, okay, that's the plan, and now we're done, and we can get back to doing our work. And I don't think it's a destination. I think we're going to need to iterate over time, and we're going to try things that are going to fail and they work today and they're not going to work in a few weeks or a few years. And there's no crystal ball. I think the pandemic, well, first of all, it's the most kind of transformational thing to happen to work and put the entire world into a remote work pilot. But I think that we have to create spaces that can adapt over time and just accept that we're going to keep evolving as people will evolve through their careers, as Evelyn was saying, but work is going to evolve. There's going to be some new technology. There's likely something else that's going to come and disrupt again. But I think the idea that we can get done with this, we probably need to let go of that and just know we're going to keep iterating. So if we can think and design, and if we go back to life cycle, like what's the life cycle of that physical space or that building, and how can we build and design in a way that it can evolve over time, and whether that's furniture-based things that you can reconfigure, but if as much as we can future-proof by building in flexibility now, and whether that's in our physical space or in our culture, our norms around how we work together, I think we just have to keep evolving and not think we're going to get there.
Yeah, so we've definitely set up Slack as a teaching culture, right? These teaching and learning culture, with the fact that we tell everyone workspaces, operations, process, and policies, we're all learning together. You need to inform that learning process to help us continue to improve. And this is going to continue to evolve. But I think, for me, it's definitely going to be building in greater flexibility. And there's already there's already companies out there that are actually really supportive in the most sustainable way of helping the small and medium-sized companies be able to change their workspaces. So I have really good friends over at Kanoa. I don't know if you guys have heard of Kanoa, but Kanoa.supply. And they allow you to purchase these kits that they've put together of workplace furniture. And they've set up a program where if you prototype it and you try it out for 3-6 months, and for whatever reason, it didn't work out for your organization, you can then put it on sale for another organization to purchase. So then even a furniture commitment becomes a little less than what it was historically. But I feel like you're going to see a lot more of these business models developing. And I always laughed a little bit before for all of the demising wall situations that every single major manufacturer has. So every single major furniture manufacturer out there has these office systems, these demising wall systems, where they're like, you can put it in place and you can take it down and you can move it around.
And it's soundproof.
I feel like, and it's soundproof. It doesn't go floor to slab, but it's soundproof. But like we all knew as workplace people that as soon as that wall gets put there, it's staying there until the end of lease. But I do feel like there's going to be somebody that's going to look at that and say, there's got to be a better way to do this, to actually make the spaces more flexible and to make it happen in a meaningful way.
And that it can be reconfigurable almost like with the users. Like if you need a facilities team, a facilities tech, if you need operations to come in and change it, then you have to plan for that, which means you're not going to have.
You need to be a company of a certain size. Yeah.
Yeah. Or so if it's, I keep saying I want magic furniture, right? I can walk in and think about how I want it today and the walls will magically change. But some of the things that even a few years ago, we would have said, I want magic this, some of that exists today. It's not magic. We used to say, gosh, I wish I could know, how long are people in the building, right? I used to want to know that years ago. Right now you're like, well, I can. And not only that, I can tell you how many people are in a room. And, I can, I wish we could, I wish I could control the temperature in my space. Wouldn't that be great? Well, now you can with an app if your company has that software. So I think you're right. I think we're going to see more innovation in that. I really like what I didn't know about the company you just referenced, but about buy the furniture, and not even now it's not even in a financial commitment, but like you don't want to buy it and be like, well, that doesn't work. So that's just going to go in the landfill, right? So you want it to keep having a useful life, and you feel like, oh, well, I can sell it. Maybe I lose some money, but the cost becomes less. But you're also not just. You're all still being sustainable. I think that we're going to see more things like that. I think we're going to see a lot in technology too that allows a meaningful experience for when truly hybrid meeting. So some people are in the office and some people are working from another location and they're connecting virtually. That tends to be who's in the room kind of controls it. And I think we're going to see even better technology with that. At Twitter, we had a policy of Twitter employees are called tweets. And so we had one tweet, one screen. So even if you were physically in the room, you still had to dial in from your computer so everybody could see who was talking, and it was an equitable experience. And that was summed it so I could see who was talking, but also about a bias towards proximity or presenteeism, right?
To we did that. One dials in, all dials in is essentially.
Oh, one dial. Yeah, I like it.
We did it.
Again, we get that's got to be in your cultural norms, right? So
it does
the cultural norms plus technology as it advances.
But I think, and then another thing is like building the business case to change the cultural norms, right? So our business case there again is to creating a more equitable workplace going forward, with with the people who are dialing in having the same experience as the people in the room. And we've tried to take that one step further, because we found that so much of the dialogue that was happening at Zoom when we all went remote was in the chat function, especially for people like me that are I might not be showing it here, but is generally a little bit more introverted. So I would just sit in meetings, especially if it gets larger than like 7 people, and leave my comments in the chat. So how do we Zoom rooms, if meet rooms, I want to say other type of rooms, when you go in, if you project, you can see what you're presenting. You can see the people calling in very, very small. But the chat box disappears and you don't know if people are chatting too. So do we need to have another screen there to also show that interaction that's going on in the background as well?
We were big users of Slack at Twitter, and a variety of channels. But Slack in a meeting it was really useful. And you could even, you could see the comment that somebody was making, and we would try to have somebody kind of moderating as well as whoever was presenting, so somebody could say, "Oh, so and so has a question," or this great comment, and to feed that. There's also some really funny side Slack channels, not part of the,
of course,
actual meetings as all the companies do. But that, as you were saying, like that really does drive a sense of community. To me, that is what used to happen when you're physically in a meeting, right? And then you'd walk out after that and have your, kind of your chatter about the meeting. That now takes place virtually, and we use Slack, but whatever your chat channel is, which, that's a nuance of the meeting and building connections, is that kind of, hey, what did you think about that?
Yeah, and what you mentioned was key, because that was we have this Meeting That Matters handbook that I actually need to go back in and update it with the latest findings from the Pulse report. But it's also like, for meetings of a certain size, make sure you have that one person who's moderating the experience of the remote employees, that are always like making sure that they are, one, getting their voices heard, and two, that they're checking in on the chat box no matter what. So also kind of assigning, again, Max, they're not like necessarily groundbreaking solutions, but there's small changes that make the hybrid experience a little bit better for everyone.
So go ahead, Melissa.
Sorry, Max, we'll let you.
No, I love
Evelyn and I could keep talking.
Yeah.
I was going to say, just one other thing, when you're saying it's not like, groundbreaking things, like just some of these basic principles. When we were all in person, I think we thought we were having really effective meetings. We assumed it because people were in the room and you could see them, and maybe they weren't. We just assumed that. And similarly, I think managers think that they knew employees were engaged because they could see them. This summer, I took a course, design thinking course at Stanford, and in my interviews, and it was a hypothetical problem to solve, but it was around employee engagement, which I said what I wanted to create was the crystal ball that would tell us all exactly what to do. But in interviewing managers, or people managers, they said, they actually don't know how to gauge that now. And what some of them who are really, open and honest and transparent said, I think I probably never did know how to gauge it, but I assumed if I saw them there in person, they were engaged. And if I saw people in the meeting nodding, I assumed it was a good meeting. And I don't know that I know how to gauge that now, but maybe I never really did. And I assumed, presence.
Those are your smart employees.
Yeah, with self-awareness, that's awesome.
Yes.
Yeah. And concerned about what do I do now? How do you do that? But there's some basic, like you were saying, it's, some just really good meeting protocols that applied in person before. And we just maybe we didn't think we needed to utilize that.
So if we zoom out a little bit, what do you think? And this is the time for kind of big thinking, blue sky, but I am kind of curious what the two of you think about this. So Salesforce, to use an example, they have and continue to drastically reduce their footprint, right? And put projects on hold and terminate leases where they can. And I know, obviously, Twitter, especially under Elon, is doing a lot of the same, sometimes for different reasons. Mm-hmm. But if we were to take all of that into account, and when you consider how inevitably hybrid is here to stay, what is, and this is for both of you, what is the future of the office? What do you think?
So for me, so you definitely have people that are in urban cores that are living, eating, breathing, sleeping all in the same space. So I think ultimately there will always be office space for those who need it for deep focus work. But I really appreciate and have always appreciated kind of the really big decision that Dropbox made in the beginning to go to these smaller spaces, frankly, that were more close to neighborhood hubs that really serve the purpose of bringing together in person when you need to come together to collaborate. Ultimately, I don't know how that bears well for urban cores. The next iteration of that conversation for architects, right, is in housing in office buildings, I think. Yeah. But if you're truly listening to your employees and what they want and how they believe that they can be most productive, I think it's building greater intentionality into your employee systems that support the employee lifecycle, whether that be even making sure that the onboarding process is an entire year, right? Rather than even the first 30, 60, 90 days to give them that support for your new people, and then how you provide for career development. And then a piece of that is, and how does that show up in the physical environment, but also how does that show up wherever they want to work from?
Totally.
But yeah.
I agree with Evelyn, and I think there's great value in the physical space, physical office space. I think what that looks like into the future is, I think it's unknown, but I think that there isn't going to be one solution, and I think that I think you have to put your offices for some companies where your customers are, like that might really make sense in a urban area. And so if you can do these, there's a lot of discussion about converting office buildings to living space.
Yes.
That's not an easy endeavor, just in the physical functioning of the buildings and what you're required for residential. But I think we're going to see it going in that direction, and people that choose to live in an urban area, or that, if their job is customer facing, and if they could live in their offices within blocks, I think that'll really serve. I still don't think you need a large space. I think there's also, I think you might have a multi, kind of a multi-phase, not phase, but different approaches within the same portfolio, in that you also want to have maybe working centers where you have talent. And does that give you a more diverse workforce that gets you a more diverse thought process in the development and execution of your product, and therefore you get a better business result? Can you put your offices near where people can afford to live? I know the Bay Area we always talk about the cost of living here in the San Francisco Bay Area, but it's not the only expensive place to live in the world. It's not cheap to live in New York. It's not cheap to live in London or Paris or anywhere else. But if you can live outside of those urban areas and still be able to get into a workspace to collaborate with teams, or access, the technology if you need it, or get your, heads down time, I think that might serve companies really well. I think that unless you're manufacturing, I don't know that I think these big campuses, that might not be what the future holds.
What I found interesting about some of what you're talking about, Melissa, is in Chicago, there's actually a number of buildings on one of our main streets that runs through the CBD, LaSalle, that have had a lot of tenant defections to newer towers, and Fulton Market is a very active neighborhood in Chicago, and a lot of those buildings are really suffering, especially because a lot of them are Art Deco buildings that are just incredibly outdated from a systems perspective. So the city is providing TIF, tax increment financing funding, to developers to convert them into residential. And the proposals actually came in, I think, earlier this week. On a macro level, what I find most interesting about this is how the lines between your work life and your personal life are being blurred more and more and more, right? You have people living more and more in the core of big urban hubs. At the same time, you have companies moving smaller ancillary or creating smaller ancillary facilities in the suburbs so that people don't have to go to the CBD if they don't need to. And that kind of goes back to the employee experience too, right? But if you compare, where we are now with, even the 50s or the 60s, right? Like, you put on a suit, you put on your work face, you go into your work mode, right? And then you get in the car and you get on the highway and you commute for a while and you get to work, and then you're in work mode. And then when you come back from work, since there are no cell phones, you're at home, right? And so there's an incredibly clear line between your personal life and your professional life. And now it's so blurred.
But I think that's also why the demand for health and wellness, as we talk about, within, like, it needs to be built within the workday too, and that consideration needs to be made because of that extra blurring. Sorry, go ahead.
Let's finish on that then. So let's talk about the office of the future and what it should have. And let's touch on health and wellness as well, because I completely agree with you. If you don't incorporate that, then maybe not immediately, but over time, it's going to have an adverse effect on all of your people. And if with those adverse effects, they're just going to filter out of the organization.
Melissa, go ahead and jump in.
There's so much data from neuroscientists and movement specialists about people's wellness and well-being, and what that means, and things that we could learn from that. If you talk about physical movement, and when you had larger real estate footprints, I'm going to offer a fitness center, and or whether that's a large fitness center or a workout room. But then, now you got to have showers because you're going to sweat, and there's a ease of use for men versus women based on our cultural expectations that we have our hair done and makeup on. But there's a lot of data around even short burst of exercise, 20 seconds. There was a study done about in an office environment of people doing 20-second burst of exercise 3 times a day, 3 days a week for like 6 weeks or something along those lines, and actual verified improvement in variety of metrics, VO2 max, or a variety of things. And you're like, well, if 20 seconds of that can do something, then, can we have a healthy workforce by encouraging people to get up from their desk? As a person who's been responsible for safety, I don't encourage running upstairs in the workplace, but some type of just that physical movement. But then we go back to, kind of the theme we've been talking about, that has to be in your cultural norms. That can't be like, oh, that's kind of weird. But wellness in all ways, right? People should be able to take their lunchtime and not be expected to have a meeting, and you should be able to turn off at the end of the day. I think this blurred work life is great in terms of it gives you flexibility. Like, maybe you can get your kids from school, and then you can, do that other bit of work later at night if it's the employee's choice. But I think with that wellness of being able to set your own boundaries around that, of when you get your work done, and that it's okay to take care of yourself during the day. And there's a whole host of data around where does adaptation happen, whether that's physical adaptation or where does learning happen. It doesn't happen when you're taking in the information, but when you step away from it. So I think we've always thought of rest areas or play areas as fun, or that's a big perk in big tech, but it's actually verifiable to increasing the brain's strategic thinking abilities. And I could clearly, it's something I'm passionate about, so I could go on and on about that. But it's just super fascinating what they're looking at in neuroscience.
Yeah. Well, sitting's the new smoking, right?
Yeah.
I feel like that's an old term now, but like,
sitting is the new vaping.
In addition to that, I would just say, back to the tools, Max, like the mental health too is something that people are talking about more. What was interesting about the Future Forum's latest pulse survey is that they're actually finding that burnout is as high as it's ever been since the beginning of the pandemic. So we also had to think about like people's mental capacity. And from that perspective, I think emotional intelligence out of our managers is going to be a skill that we need to help develop more as we begin to blur this line between mental health and well-being. There's this great app. So my friends founded this app called Kona, Kona. It's an app into Slack that kicks off every day by asking how your team is doing. And then it just, we've done the weekly stand-up meetings, right? Like this is, what's your roadblock? What are you working on? What's blocking? What's your blocker? What do you need support on thing? This is, how are you doing? And then they're layering in artificial intelligence to say, like, not only how are you doing, but it looks like you've been down. You've reported this the past 10 days. Is there anything else that we can provide you to assist you? And then their AI can loop back into any HR resources that you have to support mental wellness, and at least like surface those to employees. I bet you Salesforce has so many more resources that I haven't even thought about asking, because I actually haven't gone down that search, and I probably should. I do think more managers to, there's this notion of unlimited PTO, but I think the companies that are considering health and mental wellness are also placing a minimum on the number of vacation days that you should be taking, right? To balance that out. So I feel like those are the little things around tools, process, policies, and operations, and even kind of social development that are going to be necessary as we consider as these lines continue to blur between home and work.
And an accountability to those managers doing that. I think managers that are already tending towards that, who really care deeply about their teams, will see those tools or see those resources like, I'm going to go learn more about that. I'm going to do more of that. If there's not something already set up within the organization that's an expectation for managers and they're measured to it, the ones that aren't leaning towards that aren't going and looking at those resources and knowing that it's available, and they're still operating the same way. And most of what an employee experiences about the company they work for is what they experience with their manager. You can work for the coolest company in the world, but if your manager is saying things to you like a friend of mine's manager said to him when he put in for his vacation, he said, and is it your intention to be unavailable during that time?
Yeah.
It turns out it is. So I'm guessing that manager is not seeking out those resources about how can I better understand the wellness of my employees, right? So there's got to be, in all of your organizational norms, that has to be in there. There's an expectation of not just as managers, yes, you have to deliver the results. You have to do that in the most efficient manner that you can for the benefit of the company, but that has got to include the well-being of your team.
Well, and conversely, I think for those managers that are naturally inclined to be more empathetic and care about their people, they should have all the tools at their disposal. Their voices should be elevated so that the entire organization can see how a good manager can improve employee experience. Ladies, this has been absolutely enlightening. Thank you. Evelyn Lee, head of workplace strategy and innovation at Slack, and Melissa Myers, who was until recently the director of America's real estate and workplace at Twitter. Thank you both for joining and sharing your wisdom.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Max. And so wonderful to meet Melissa, too. So
it was great to meet you, Evelyn. And thanks so much, Max.
And thanks to everyone else for tuning into the future of work and solving for experience. We'll talk to you next time.